At RxBar, they believe in simple nutrition without the BS. That's why they said no to artificial ingredients and yes to deliver intentional, transparent nutrition. Try their original 12-gram protein bar, the nut butter and oat bar, or minis. RxBar, the proud sponsor of No BS. Use code RxBar on rxbar.com for 25% off. Subject to full terms and conditions and to change. Valid until September 30, 2025, and may not be combined with other offers. See rxbar.com for full details and limitations.
This podcast is supported by The RealReal. Meet Christine. She loves shopping. And this is the sound of fashion overload. Too many fabulous things, not enough space. So Christine started selling with The RealReal.
I've always loved collecting designer pieces. Gucci bags, Prada heels. But my style keeps evolving. Selling with The RealReal? Game changer. I earn more, and they do everything.
Seriously, just drop off your items or schedule a pickup. We handle the photos, descriptions, pricing, even shipping. You just sit back and watch your items sell fast to our 38 million members.
And I get peace of mind knowing I earn more selling with The RealReal than anywhere else.
Exactly. That's the sound of your closet working for you. The RealReal. Earn more, save time, sell fast. And right now, you can get an extra $100 site credit when you sell for the first time. Go to therealreal.com to get your extra $100. Therealreal.com. That's therealreal.com.
Hey, warmer from the low! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you, as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Tristan Freeman, who does an incredible job over at Bustin' Brackets. We're going to be chatting with him about just how he's taking a look at some of these coaching hires that we saw in the offseason. We're going to be discussing a wide variety of different coaches that got hired, ones that got hired from in-house, that stayed with the team that they were at as like an assistant, being elevated as a head coach. These guys coming up from the non-Division I level, going up to the Division I level. We're also going to be talking about some of the retreads as well, so we've got a lot to talk about with Tristan, and he is a man that's out there in the city of Pittsburgh. He does a great job covering the ACC and the Atlantic 10, so we're going to take a look at the coaching hires that were made in those two conferences as well. If you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, there's the name does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. With EdgeBoost, they are ensuring that 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, Greg, that'll get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25, and additionally, for those of you guys that are jonesing for more conference previews, those are going to be coming up within the next few days. I am working on the Sun Belt, which will hopefully be out either tomorrow or 2 days from now, so that is very much on the radar. Additionally, I'm looking at the Southland Conference. That'll probably be done within the next, I would say, about 4 to 5 days as well. So that's a little bit of a status update with regards to some of those conference previews, and today we're talking coaches with our good friend Tristan, who you're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Oopsnut351, does a great job over at Bustin' Brackets, but additionally, he does some great work over at the Field of 68 Sleepers Media as well. And Tristan, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
Always appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, how about if we dive in on what we've been seeing here in the offseason with regards to a lot of these coaches, because we've been talking a lot about the hoopla of the transfer portal, but how do you take a look at some of these teams that they kept things in-house? Because these are some of my favorite teams. A lot of times it's a little bit more of these mid-major teams rather than the power conference teams, but still it's a just sort of topic that I think is very good to bring up, because a lot of these mid-major teams are in danger of being poached by the transfer portal. I've noticed that when they've hired from within, typically good things have happened for them.
Yeah, one example, for me locally was Duquesne Dukes. Drew Joyce, take over for Keith Danbry, head coach, and he was able to keep basically every rotation player from a year ago. There was ups and downs, but at least gave, him a starting point to work with. And it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. I think Villanova was the definition of, it going awry with how Neptune's struggling. Jury's still out on Hubert Davis and UNC, but I don't think there's anything wrong with programs trying in the end, it comes down to the importance of stability for programs, because if you don't have that and it becomes, a complete crapshoot, whether it works out, and if it doesn't, then you'll have to start over completely, and that can be, a big issue for programs.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that there have been some schools that have very much done right, and then some of these mid-major programs have just become factories in terms of hiring on coaches. Like Utah State over the last few years, they've had to replace a new coach every single year. This offseason, they did not have to do so, but Drake, they had to go back out there. They had to hire on a new coach once again after Ben McCollum, very rightfully so, goes to the power conference level with Iowa. But I think that Eric Henderson was a really good hire for Drake. I don't know if they're going to be able to duplicate last year, because I think that would be unrealistic expectations to have a first-year head coach do what Ben McCollum did last year. But I thought that was a rock-solid situation where, it's a bad situation when you lose a guy like Ben McCollum, but at the same time, hiring on someone like an Eric Henderson, who brought with him a few guys from South Dakota State, I think was making the best of it.
There's a few programs that have gotten to the point where it doesn't matter to coach, it's about the program. You mentioned Utah State, VCU at the A-10 level is another example as well. And Drake is starting to be that too, as sort of the key consistent program out of Missouri Valley. And, for Drake especially, with Floyd Chicago gone in a conference that does seem to be a bit wide open, at least on a year-to-year basis. Even though losing coaches is never fun, if you just consistently rack up the wins, then you're going to be in a good spot going forward, regardless of the coaches. And we'll see what happens with this one. As you mentioned, a lot of new faces, but if they can get past the likes of Illinois State and Belmont, then I think that, Henderson's going to have a good first year.
Yep, I think so as well. It's Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I'm so glad that you brought up VCU as well, because they're another team that's been coach-proof. Like, this goes all the way back to Shaka Smart about 12 to 15 years ago. How do you attribute a team like a VCU that they seem to always lose their coach every single few years, whether that be Rhodes a few years ago? Now, they had to pick up the pieces with losing Odom, but every single one of these coaches that they brought in has had some form of success, has led the team to the NCAA tournament, and it feels like this is just going to be rinse and repeat, with a lot of people thinking that VCU might be a top 50 team once again this season.
Yeah, a lot of the top teams in the league in the A-10 lost a lot of talent. Dayton lost plenty of talent as well. I think VCU took a very interesting choice with Brian's head coach, with Martelli, who's one of the younger ones, but he did turn Brian into a top team in America East over Vermont, so that's highly impressive. But he got an interesting roster with some transfers that could be breakout guys, including Ahmad Noel coming over from UConn, and Brandon Jennings could be a breakout transfer. I think the A-10, again, is going to be fairly wide open. I think, St. Louis and George Washington are teams who brought back their top bigs, but the defense still leaves a lot to be desired. So I can see Martelli having a good first year at VCU, but if not, then truly it's going to be wide open.
It is going to be really interesting to see what happens in the Atlantic 10, because I feel like this has been one of the conferences that has done one of the best jobs in terms of coaching hires, not just this cycle, but over the last few off seasons. But another team that is facing a little bit of uphill battles, I know that there are some sanctions against them, is Fordham. And Mike Magpio is another guy that I'm just very bullish on what he was able to do over at UC Riverside. Always felt like he got a little bit more with a little bit less over there, and being able to bring him in for Fordham, where, let's call it what it is, the facilities are not necessarily upper level in terms of the Atlantic 10. He's still brought in some relatively good talent, even with everything that Fordham is up against. And I thought that this was a really good hire that I think is going to pay off long term. And heck, even here in the short term, year number one, I think that's going to pay some dividends.
Yeah, folks who remember before he went back to Villanova, Cal Neptune had a couple of breakout seasons at Fordham, which got him, in the national spotlight. It will be interesting because you can have one good year if you get the really good transfer haul. And Macau does have a couple of solid transfers, including DeJour Reeves and Zariq Nutter, who I think are some very, interesting all-league caliber guards. But will the Rams be a contender program? Because there's still a lot of solid, good teams in the league that they're going to have to jump over on a year-to-year basis, and that remains to be seen. But it's definitely important to at least get a good first year so that you can have even more interest from guys coming out the portal going forward.
Yep, I do agree with you there. And I do think that when it comes to some of these coaches as well, them coming up from the non-Division One ranks is something to be able to identify as well. As I know that a lot of non-D1 coaches have come up right away and they've been immediately successful. We talked about Ben McCollum. I think that that's the primary example. But that said, I mean, what we've been able to see over at a school like CSUN, Cal State Northridge over the last few years, they've been able to do a good job. We saw it with Cal Poly last season as well. And I feel like these are some of the guys that go a little bit under the radar, but some of these Division II coaches getting an opportunity. Like I look at Central Michigan as perhaps a team that has a little bit of upside with the way that they've been able to revamp things. I think that these are guys that are very much under the radar because we've never seen them at the Division I level, but I think that winning is winning, and we're seeing more and more of these guys come up from the non-D1 ranks and immediately have success too.
I mentioned before Drake and McCollum, who was one of the biggest stars coming out of the D2 level, and he had an excellent year with Drake, which now bolstered him now at Iowa. So, yeah, there's definitely coaches who are just known for winning, and you know you can go for assistants on the high majors who are known for recruiting, and obviously that's a huge trait to have these days. But you're going to need guys that have the X's and O's, and just the ability to win anywhere. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to be able to recruit. I do see, more of an emphasis on coaches who can win more so than those who can just solely recruit. Obviously, the ones that can do both are going to be highly favored, but if you have to pick one or the other, especially if you're a program who's trying to get out the basement like a Fordham, then getting proven winners is definitely the route to go.
Absolutely. As joining me on the show, we do have Tristan Freeman. He does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, and he's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And usually I'm not a fan of retread hires, but there were a few that stood out to me that I feel like are going to be really good ones, and we're going to address them on the flip side with Tristan. We're going to talk a little bit about the hiring of Josh Pastner over at UNLV. We're going to be diving in a little bit more with Bryant as well. They hire on a guy that I really like, and Jamion Christian, who I think is going to be able to work out really well for them. Additionally, we have to take a little bit of a look at the ACC coaches that got hired on in the offseason. As Tristan, he does a great job of taking a look at the ACC landscape, and we'll open it up to Tristan, see which coaching hires he's a little bit bullish on as well. That's on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now a part of the Decent Family Podcast.
Lowe's has the Labor Day deals you need to give your home a new look. Buy one, get one free select interior paint via Visa gift card rebate. Then, add the final touch with 2 for $8 on select 2.5 or 3-quart mums. Refresh your home and save big while doing it. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 9/3. Mums offer in-store only. Selection varies by location. While supplies last. More terms and restrictions apply. See Lowes.com/rebates for details.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always a pleasure to be joined by Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets. You're able to follow him on the old Twitter/X at Hoops351. Initially does some great work over at Field of 68, Sleepers Media as well. And we've been talking about a wide variety of different coaching hires that we've seen here in the offseason. And there are a few guys that were actually in the media the past few years that I feel like they were great hires. Jamion Christian and Josh Pastner really stand out to me. Josh Pastner going to UNLV. We'll touch upon him in a minute, but Jamion Christian is a guy that I felt like got a little bit of a bad rap for his time out there in the Atlantic 10. Really liked him over at Mount St. Mary's. He really showed through with his media work how much he knows about the great game of basketball. Actually joined this podcast once or twice as well, so shout out to Jamion Christian. We like him here on Coast to Coast Hoops, but that said, how do you take a look at how he might be able to fare with Bryant, a team that's a little bit new to the America East, but we saw them bust through last season, and I'm losing a guy like a Phil Martelli Jr. is rough, but I thought that they made a good hire here with Mr. Jamion Christian.
Yeah, a name for those type of coaches are known as retreads, the ones who've had success but then eventually flamed out, which is why they're unemployed. I think Quanzo Martin, who was a former Missouri head coach, is one of the more famous ones who went back to the major level. And, if you're looking for stability, you're looking for, your program to get back to being competitive, those make sense. And if you're a program like Bryant, who is still fairly new in the AEC after coming over from the NEC, and you still want to, maintain your status as a contending program at that level, getting a coach who obviously still has connections, can recruit and be a magnet for, transfers that are willing to move down, then I do think Christian will be a good hire. It will be interesting to see if he can keep them at the same tier as Vermont or if they'll take a step back. But if he keeps them competitive and still is a contender, then maybe he could be a candidate to eventually move back up a level or two.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that with a guy like Jamion Christian, he's a guy that I think is going to be able to have a lot of success. And typically, I'm not the biggest fan of retreads, but that said, I do think that there are a few guys out there that are going to be able to do a solid job. I mentioned Jamion Christian. I felt like he got a little bit of a bad rap. And then when it comes to UNLV, I feel like they've got a really good chance with Josh Pastor as well, because I think that there's a lot of Memphis fans out there that might be realizing, hey, Josh Pastor might not have been such a bad guy after all, because we've seen Memphis sort of mire mediocrity over the last few years. And I feel like UNLV really got it right. And I think that a lot of people have been surprised by this, the way that Josh Pastor has hit the transfer portal, because I actually feel like his broadcasting, what he's been able to do over at ESPN a few years ago, it's been really able to help him out in this time around with UNLV to be able to put together a nice roster.
Yeah, and he also had fairly mediocre time at Georgia Tech, but as we're seeing a few years later, the Yellow Jackets aren't necessarily guaranteed to be elite in this day and age in the ACC. Pastor, can recruit, and UNLV obviously is going to be an appealing place for players, and he got several interesting breakout candidates. He has Dre Gibbs Lawhorn, a former top 50 guard at Illinois. Nas Cunningham's a former top 50 guy from Alabama. Emmanuel Stevens was like the fourth center at Arizona, but top 100 guy too. So he got a lot of interesting candidates that can break out, and he's going to need a couple of them too if they're going to be competitive in the Mountain West. It will be interesting to see what they do as a program going forward once, San Diego State's and Boise State's move to the Pac-12, because there is an opportunity for UNLV to be the face of the new Mountain West in years to come, and we'll see if Pastor can be the guy that can do that for them.
Yep, no question about it. I thought that was a solid hire at the start, and he's really been doing a nice job of being able to revamp the transfer portal. And then I want to get your thoughts on something that has become a little bit more of a trend as well. Guys going from the NBA as, say, assistants, game managers, in the case of Zach Chu, who goes on over to Radford, and they immediately become head coaches at some of these schools. Like with Florida State, I think that Luke Locks, hopefully I said that correct, is a little bit of a roll of the dice, but I think that someone like Chu going on over to Radford, where it's a little bit of a lower level, I think that could pay off big time for them. We know that Iona is taking a roll of the dice with hiring on Dan Garreau, who is over at the Pelicans as well, and Tobin Anderson getting fired after 2 years. That was a little bit of a rough deal there, but how do we take a look at this? And do you think that this might be a little bit more of a wave of the future with what we saw out of BYU last year and their immediate success with Kevin Young?
Yeah, I was going to mention, Young, proved to be very good in his first year with the team. Winning 26 games, Big 12 level for them was impressive. And look, if you want to be able to recruit guys and saying, hey, I know what it takes to get you to the NBA because I've been there myself, then that's going to be an appealing selling point. You got to find ways to sort of get guys to want to come to you. We'll see ultimately if it works. As I said earlier, guys with proven track records, it's probably more ideal. But, you're a program like Florida State and you felt that you were sort of being in the middle or sort of in a rut. Why not take a high swing on someone who's more unknown? But it could also backfire and you can, fall down because he doesn't know what he's doing. And not saying that, anyone will be at a Kenny Payne level in Louisville, but, you can make, big splashes and it can fail miserably if you're not careful compared to going for the safer, but might not be the type of move that wins the offseason or is flashy.
Yep, exactly. And I do think that that's so interesting that you bring up the Kenny Payne situation, which, man, that was not so great because out there in the ACC, this is one of your main conferences. You do such a great job taking a look at things with Pittsburgh. I feel like you would agree with me. The ACC has fallen off tough times the last few years because there have been a lot of coaches that have been lost. Schools like Syracuse, North Carolina, Miami, losing these legends, that's been hurtful for them. But I do feel like a lot of these ACC schools Eagles got it right here in the offseason. With Virginia, I feel like they had one of the more under-the-radar home run hires in Riot Odom, and I actually think that they have the chance in season number 1 to be just as good as NC State, which Will Wade, he did an amazing job of being able to revamp that roster. I think both of those teams are going to be effective right away. With Miami, it might be a little bit more of a slow build, but Jai Lucas, I think that he goes in there, and he's going to be able to have some immediate success. And for an ACC conference that obviously has fallen behind the Big Ten, the SEC, all those conferences, I feel like they need to have a good coaching hiring cycle this offseason. I really thought that they got it with those 3 hires.
Yeah, definitely high ceiling type of hires, if you're looking to compete to be in the top tier right along Duke and UNC. Obviously, Louisville hit with their hiring Pat Kelsey over from Charleston. We'll see what happens with the new ones. It's fascinating because there's probably 3 or 4 other, coaching situations that we'll have to monitor months from now when it comes to guys who could be on hot seat. But there's going to be a turnover in the ACC. There's already been one when it comes to the older names and the famous ones, and there's about to be a new one with guys who have underachieved. So it started going 2 years ago. There's more of a change, and I wouldn't be surprised if we had a few more in the league to come.
Exactly, and I do think that for the ACC, they very much got it right, and I know you have done such a great job of looking at all these changes in the offseason. You've been taking a look, doing a lot of rankings in general, and is there a team or two with a coaching hire that has been made in the offseason that I haven't mentioned yet that you just feel good about it, and you feel like the team got it right in the offseason, and they're set to ascend, whether that be just on the mid-major ranks, the high major ranks, the low major ranks? It's Steelers' choice here. Just a team or two that you look at and you feel like they got it right this offseason, and they're going to be in for a good year this year.
I'm not necessarily certain that they're going to be super good, but I do think Minnesota hiring Nico Medved from Colorado State is going to be one that pays off for them in the long term. I mean, he's been quietly really good at development when it comes to just getting at least one player to be a superstar for them in the last few years. Nick Clifford was the latest examples, but he's had Isaiah Stevens, he's had other guys. And if he can, keep players in Minnesota, then I do think he'll eventually get some all-league caliber guys himself. And he has some interesting wing forward prospects in BJ Omar and Bobby Durkin and guys who can be really good offensive players. I think the Gophers could be an interesting possible dark horse to watch in the Big Ten, who will at least make the conference tournament. So we'll say that'll be a decent goal for them year one. But I do like to hire one that has potential long term.
Yes, I think so as well. I really like Nico Medved as a coach, and with Nico Medved, it's a little bit more special for him because he began his career out there in Minnesota. If I'm not mistaken, he played for the Golden Gophers, so very much familiar with the area. We saw what he was able to do over at Colorado State, and just flat out everywhere that he's been, he has been a winner. Just like every single podcast that you're on, Tristan, it's always a good one. You do such an amazing job taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. You're dialed into everything, getting set for the upcoming season. So let the good people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at Hoopsnut351 and at Bustin' Brackets, my main site for all the preseason coverage for college basketball, as we're just days away from the start of September, which makes us just 2 months away from the opening tip-off.
Absolutely. And Tristan, he's doing such a great job getting set for this upcoming college basketball season. Every single time he joins me, he makes us all smarter. He lends such great insights. So big thanks to Tristan for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LaRZM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. And you're going to get more conference previews coming up in the next few days. Do plan on doing the Sun Belt within the next 48 or so hours. We're getting things in place for the Southland within the next few days as well. So be on the lookout for that. And I'll be with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other toppings, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at Fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.